In 1997, The Fifth Element blasted onto screens like nothing audiences had seen before. It was a collision of neon skies, flying taxis, outrageous fashion, alien opera, and explosions big enough to shake the cinema walls. Luc Besson's vision wasn't just a movie. It was a fever dream stitched together from decades of imagination, a future that felt both ridiculous and strangely believable. The film was chaos wrapped in couture. Jean-Paul Gaultier dressed a galaxy in skin-tight neoprene and ceremonial armor. Bruce Willis cracked deadpan jokes in the middle of firefights. Milla Jovovich spoke a language no human had ever heard, then dismantled enemies with lightning-fast kicks. Gary Oldman chewed through scenes as a villain so eccentric that he never once even met the hero. It was science fiction turned inside-out bright instead of shadowed, absurd instead of solemn, unapologetically French, yet built to conquer the world. These are 20 stories from behind the camera moments of risk, genius, and sheer strangeness that made The Fifth Element what it is. From the boy in a small French village who built a galaxy in his head, to the set where the largest indoor explosion in film history roared to life, these are the hidden truths of a sci-fi classic that refused to follow the rules. Fact number 1. The boy who built a universe. Long before The Fifth Element exploded onto screens in a blur of orange hair, flying taxis, and opera from another planet, it began in a small, quiet village in France. There, a teenage boy named Luc Besson was surrounded not by art galleries or film sets, but by silence. His parents were scuba instructors, and his days were filled with long stretches of isolation. He had no stage lights, no cameras, no Hollywood dreams, only an imagination that refused to stay small. At 16, Besson began writing. He didn't think of it as a film script. It was a private refuge, a place where he could hide from the real world. On those pages, he built galaxies. He drew characters like Lilu, Zorg, and the towering Mondoshaans. He wrote alien civilizations into being and filled them with strange histories, rules, and faiths. He wasn't thinking about budgets or casting. He was thinking about escaping. Over time, that escape grew into something larger, an entire fictional universe stitched together from the mind of a lonely teenager. It would take more than 2 decades for those first sketches and words to evolve into a film. By then, The Fifth Element would become one of the most expensive science fiction productions ever made. But under the explosions, under the neon chaos and world-building spectacle, the heart of the story remained the same. It was still the invention of that 16-year-old boy writing his way out of loneliness. And when the world finally saw it on screen, they weren't just seeing a sci-fi epic. They were stepping into the dream of someone who had been building it for half his life. Fact number 2. A universe on papers. Luc Besson never set out to write a single movie. His first version of The Fifth Element wasn't a script, it was a galaxy, sprawling and alive, sketched in ink and imagination. At over 400 pages, this early draft was more encyclopedia than screenplay, bursting with histories, alien species, political intrigue, and cultural detail. He didn't just name planets, he gave them climates, religions, and economies. He didn't just imagine costumes, he envisioned centuries of fashion trends that led to them. There were interstellar trade disputes, galactic council debates, and full civilizations that would never make it to the screen. This was no accidental overreach. Besson was building something meant to be 3 full films, each exploring different corners of his vast creation. He could tell you the menu at an alien street market, or the legal codes of a distant moon. There were maps of cities we would never visit, and languages for characters we would never hear. Every inch of his imagined future was stitched with purpose. A universe so dense that even the background extras would have had lifetimes of stories. But when the time came to make the movie, the studios pushed back. It was too big, too strange, too risky to shoot in one piece. Besson was forced to make a brutal cut, collapsing his 3-film epic into one self-contained story. Most of his notes and world building never made it beyond his notebooks. What survived on screen was just the middle slice of an immense, unseen world. Yet even that slice carried the texture and depth of something much larger. Hints of civilizations we'll never see, flashes of politics never explained, and whispers of an entire galaxy still orbiting in the mind of the man who built it. Fact number 3. The hero who could have been, Corbin Dallas. The ex-soldier turned reluctant cab driver might have looked very different. Before Bruce Willis was on the radar, Luc Besson and the studio considered another Hollywood heavyweight, Mel Gibson. Coming fresh off Braveheart, Gibson was at the peak of his box office power. His name carried international pull, his acting carried gravitas, and his charisma could anchor any blockbuster. The studio saw him as a safe bet, but Besson hesitated. Corbin Dallas wasn't meant to be a brooding war hero. He was a man trapped between worlds, equally capable of dry wit and explosive action. Gibson's intensity leaned toward the serious, the grounded, and the restrained. Besson wanted something looser, someone who could survive in chaos without losing charm. When Bruce Willis read the part, it clicked. His smirk, his ease with comedic timing, and his knack for playing the everyman under pressure turned Corbin into more than a soldier. He became a cab driver with bad luck, a sharp tongue, and a hero's heart that reluctantly rose to the occasion. Willis gave Dallas a sardonic edge, delivering lines with a shrug, even while dodging bullets. His physicality could sell the action, but his warmth made the character human. With Gibson, the fifth element might have been darker, cooler, but less fun. With Willis, it became a ride-along adventure where the hero didn't just save the world, he cracked jokes while doing it. And in a film exploding with color and absurdity, that humor was the anchor that kept the chaos from collapsing in on itself. Fact number 4. A villain done as a favor. Gary Oldman's Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg remains one of sci-fi's most bizarre and magnetic villains, but he didn't audition for the role, didn't campaign for it, and didn't even fully understand it. His involvement was born from gratitude. Years earlier, Luc Besson had helped produce Kneel by Mouth, a deeply personal project for Oldman. When Besson called asking him to join the Fifth Element, Oldman agreed immediately, without hesitation. Oldman barely read the script before committing. He later admitted that he had no idea what the film was actually about, but on set, he threw himself into the role with his usual transformative commitment. He built Zorg from fragments, part Texas oil baron, part corporate sociopath, part cartoonish madman. The plastic half-helmet, the exaggerated accent, the odd limp. These were choices Oldman layered in to make Zorg unpredictable and unforgettable. Despite hating the movie personally, Oldman's performance became one of its defining elements. His Zorg was both hilarious and menacing, a villain who never directly confronts the hero, but whose influence spreads like oil through the story. Fans embraced his every eccentric detail, quoting his lines and imitating his drawl. Even for a man with a career full of memorable characters, Zorg stood out, a performance born not from passion for the story, but from loyalty to a friend. Fact number 5. The search for Lilu. The role of Lilu required something rare, an actress who felt otherworldly without trying. The casting call brought in over 8,000 hopefuls, from seasoned stars to unknown newcomers. Among them was Elizabeth Berkley, fresh from Showgirls, and others who arrived armed with alien-like gestures, strange accents, and commanding stage presence. Yet none seemed right. Then Milla Jovovich walked in. She didn't command the room, she didn't raise her voice, but her presence stopped Besson in his tracks. She didn't seem from France or America. She seemed like she was from somewhere that didn't exist. Her face carried mystery, her body language an effortless grace. She wasn't performing alienness, she simply was. Besson chose her instantly. The orange bandage outfit would become iconic, but it wasn't the costume that made Lilu unforgettable. It was Milla's purity of presence. She radiated both vulnerability and power, embodying a savior who was also learning the world she was saving. Out of thousands of women, she was the one who didn't need to convince anyone she was from the future. She simply belonged there. Fact number 6. Heartbreak behind the diva. Halfway through the film, the alien diva Plava Laguna takes the stage, her voice unlocking the key to saving the universe. Beneath the blue makeup and elaborate prosthetics was Maïwenn Labisco, actress, director, and Luc Besson's wife at the time. Tall and ethereal, she brought a strange stillness to the role that made her performance hypnotic. But behind the scenes, her marriage was unraveling. As Besson directed, he grew closer to his new star, Milla Jovovich. Their connection deepened over language lessons, late-night script discussions, and long days on set. By the time filming wrapped, Besson had separated from Mai Wen and was openly with Milla. The shift wasn't a public scandal, it was a quiet change of orbit. Yet the film carries that bittersweet undercurrent. Two luminous women, each unforgettable in her role, both tied to the same man in very different ways. In the opera scene, when Plava Laguna sings for the fate of the universe, there's an unspoken truth behind her voice. In real life, she was watching her own world change forever. Fact number 7. The language of love and aliens. Lilu didn't just look alien, she spoke alien. Luc Besson had invented the divine language while developing the script, a fully constructed tongue with over 400 unique words. It wasn't random syllables or nonsense sounds. It had grammar, structure, and rules. On set, Milla Jovovich didn't simply memorize her lines phonetically. She learned the language like a second skin. She and Besson practiced it together, perfecting the cadence and melody until it felt natural to her character. But what began as a professional exercise turned into something more intimate. As Besson and Jovovich grew closer off-screen, they started using the divine language privately, in love letters, on scraps of paper passed between takes, whispered during quiet moments on set. It became a secret code only they understood, a playful way to speak without anyone else knowing. Their romance wouldn't last, but the language endured. Every alien phrase Jovovich utters in the film is fluent, deliberate, and filled with subtext. On screen, it deepens Lilu's otherworldly presence. Off-screen, it was an artifact of a real relationship, frozen in film. In a way, the divine language is the purest relic of the fifth element, a mix of fiction and truth, born in a screenplay but lived in real life. Fact number 8. The action star beneath the orange straps. Lilu wasn't meant to be a passive figure waiting for rescue. She was the ultimate weapon, a blur of speed and strength. To make that believable, Milla Jovovich committed fully to the physical demands of the role. Many stars rely heavily on stunt doubles, but Jovovich was determined to perform the bulk of Lilu's action herself. She trained for weeks in martial arts, wire work, and choreographed fight sequences. She learned how to throw punches that looked cinematic yet precise, how to move with the kind of fluid speed that suggested inhuman agility. When the camera rolled on the iconic corridor battle, Lilu dismantled a squad of armed guards with kicks, flips, and bone-snapping blows. It wasn't a stuntwoman in an orange wig. It was Jovovich, delivering take after take despite bruises, sore muscles, and the heat of the set lights. Her commitment gave Lilu's fights a raw authenticity that CGI alone couldn't create. Every move looked dangerous because, in many ways, it was. Jovovich didn't just wear the straps, she earned the right to call herself the fifth element's most dangerous force. Fact number 9. A gun that could really burn you. Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg's all-in-one superweapon seemed like pure sci-fi fantasy. A cartoonish collection of missile pods, poison darts, and a flamethrower. But part of that prop wasn't fake at all. The flamethrower worked. The special effects team, known for pushing practical effects to their limit, built the gun with a real flame projection system. During testing, one shot went wrong. The fire burst higher than expected, licking across the ceiling of the set. Crew members scrambled with fire extinguishers, and for a moment, there was a real risk the entire production stage could go up in smoke. No one was hurt, but it was a stark reminder that the fifth element wasn't just dangerous in story. Besson thrived on chaos, and the crew leaned into it, building props and effects that blurred the line between fiction and reality. In Zorg's hands, the weapon was a symbol of corporate power gone mad. In the crew's hands, it was a reminder that even in a controlled environment, fire is never just an effect. Fact number 10. The melting aliens. In the film's opening, the towering Mondoshawan aliens shuffle slowly through an ancient temple. Their deliberate pace feels ceremonial, almost sacred, but it was born from necessity. The costumes were massive, weighing nearly 80 pounds each, made of thick foam with no ventilation. There were no fans, no cooling systems. Once zipped in, the actors were trapped inside. Under the hot set lights, the temperature inside those suits soared. The performers could barely see, could barely move, and had to take each step with caution to avoid collapsing. At one point, an actor did collapse from heat exhaustion, forcing the crew to cut the suit open to pull him out in time. The slowness that gave the Mondoshawans their eerie gravitas was actually survival. Every step was heavy. every breath was an effort. Yet on film, it works, turning a production limitation into an aesthetic choice. The aliens look like ancient gods moving at the pace of eternity, when in truth, they were just trying to make it to the end of the take without passing out. Fact number 11. The suit that wouldn't let Ruby. Sit Ruby Rod's leopard print jumpsuit might look like the pinnacle of comfort for a flamboyant galactic radio host, but in reality, it was a nightmare. Designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier, the suit weighed 50 pounds, featured a rigid spine, and offered almost no flexibility. Chris Tucker couldn't bend, couldn't lean forward, and certainly couldn't sit down. Between takes, while other cast members rested in chairs, Tucker had to stand or lean awkwardly against walls. The heat inside the suit was stifling, and by the end of each shooting day, he was drenched in sweat. Yet none of that struggle shows on screen. As Ruby, Tucker burst with energy, screaming, bouncing, spinning through scenes with infectious chaos. The discomfort may have even added to the performance. Unable to relax physically, Tucker's Ruby feels perpetually wound up, a character living in a constant state of high voltage. In the world of The Fifth Element, he's the loudest signal in the galaxy, even if the man behind him was silently wishing for a chair. Fact number 12. The biggest indoor explosion in film history. When the Divas concert hall erupts in flames, it feels like movie magic, the kind of moment you'd expect to be done with miniatures or CGI. But Besson insisted on doing it for real. The production team rigged a full-size set for demolition inside a real structure, loaded with explosives, breakaway walls, and fire charges. They had one shot. There was no resetting after the blast. Dozens of cameras captured every angle, fire marshals stood ready, and every cast and crew member had to be in sync for safety. When the detonation hit, the result was spectacular, the largest indoor explosion ever filmed at the time. The flames roared, debris flew, and the chaos felt immediate because it was immediate. In a movie filled with futuristic illusions, this was raw, old-school filmmaking at its most dangerous and spectacular. Fact number 13. The hero and villain who never met. In most action films, the climax is simple. Hero and villain face each other, exchange final words, and settle the conflict in a decisive showdown. The Fifth Element broke that rule completely. Corbin Dallas and Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg, Bruce Willis and Gary Oldman never share a single scene. Their paths circle one another, their actions shaping each other's fates, but they never physically meet. This was no accident. Luc Besson designed it that way from the start. He wanted their conflict to feel like two storms colliding from a distance, Dallas saving the world by sheer stubbornness and luck, Zorg trying to profit from its destruction through greed and cunning. The tension comes not from direct confrontation, but from ripple effects. When Zorg's schemes set obstacles in Dallas's path, the audience feels the stakes without needing the two to trade blows. In the end, Zorg dies without ever looking Dallas in the eye. It's a narrative gamble that works precisely because the world of The Fifth Element is so chaotic. Here, even the most important enemies can be galaxies apart, proving that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is one you never even see coming. Fact number 14. Sci-fi in full sunlight. Science fiction often hides in shadow. Corridors lit in steel blue, alien planets shrouded in mist, spaceships lit like haunted houses. Luc Besson rejected all of it. He believed the future didn't have to be cold and dark. It could be bursting with color and light. He lit The Fifth Element like a dream in daylight. Taxi chases raced under bright blue skies. Gunfights erupted in white, sterile hallways. Explosions bloomed orange against golden clouds. There was nowhere for cheap effects to hide. Every detail was exposed in the sun. This decision was risky. Harsh light reveals flaws, and in the 1990s, CGI was far from flawless. But Besson embraced it, trusting his production design, costumes, and miniature work to hold up under the glare. The result was a science fiction world unlike anything else at the time. Not a dystopian nightmare, but a chaotic living carnival. It wasn't about squinting into darkness. It was about being blinded by the strange beauty of the future. Fact number 15. The role written for royalty. Before Chris Tucker's Ruby Rod screamed onto the screen in a leopard print tornado, the role was meant for one man, Prince. Besson envisioned him from the start. The voice, the androgynous swagger, the ability to blur masculine and feminine energy without losing an ounce of charisma. Prince was intrigued. He read the script, met with Besson, and seemed ready to step into the role. Then he saw the Jean-Paul Gaultier costumes: lace, mesh, plunging necklines, towering heels. They were outrageous even by Prince's standards. He decided they were too feminine, a line he wasn't willing to cross for the role, and quietly walked away. Enter Chris Tucker, younger, faster, and armed with a high-pitched comedic energy. He fused Michael Jackson's dance moves with Prince's flamboyant style, creating a character so chaotic that he dominated every scene. Ruby Rhod, as we know him, is pure Tucker, but in some alternate cinematic universe, Prince is still holding that mic, singing the future into being. Fact number 16. From canned booze to cult glory. When The Fifth Element premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, the reaction was far from adoring. Critics booed. They called it loud, shallow, nonsensical, a glittering mess of style over substance. Besson's masterpiece, made with the largest budget in French history, seemed destined for ridicule. But the audience told a different story. Moviegoers didn't care if the plot was messy. They quoted Ruby Rhod's lines, obsessed over Lilu's hair, and replayed the diva's opera scene until the VHS tape wore thin. Over time, its reputation shifted. What critics had dismissed as too much, fans embraced as just enough. Today, The Fifth Element lives as a cult classic, celebrated precisely for its weirdness. It is unapologetically bright, bizarre, and unpredictable, the kind of film that feels like it shouldn't exist, yet somehow works because it dares to break every rule. Fact number 17. Dressing the entire galaxy. Luc Besson didn't just want costumes for his main characters. He wanted an entire universe dressed with purpose. To do it, he turned to fashion icon Jean-Paul Gaultier. Gaultier designed over 1,000 costumes by hand, creating unique styles for every alien race, background extra, and walk-on role. The Mondoshaans were wrapped in armor-like robes inspired by ancient priests. The Mangalores were dressed in rough, chaotic battle gear. Flight attendants wore skin-tight neoprene corsets. Even street vendors had detailed futuristic outfits, despite appearing on screen for only seconds. This obsessive approach meant that no frame of The Fifth Element felt empty. Every passerby looked like they belonged in this strange future. In Besson's universe, clothing wasn't just wardrobe, it was world-building stitched into every seam. Fact number 18. Spaceships with ancient secrets. The massive Mondoshaan ships in the opening scene weren't just sci-fi creations, they carried the weight of history. Besson wanted them to feel timeless, as if they had existed long before human civilization. Their shapes were drawn from Egyptian geometry, rounded tops, thick bases, proportions that echoed temple carvings and sun worship structures. It was a subtle nod to the ancient astronaut theory, the idea that alien visitors influenced early human architecture and culture. By blending sacred design with futuristic technology, Besson tied the film's story to humanity's oldest myths. In The Fifth Element, even the ships themselves hinted at a truth bigger than the plot, that the past and the future are connected by forces far older than we can imagine. Fact number 19. The city built by hand. The neon cityscapes of The Fifth Element, those endless towers, stacked highways, and streams of flying cars, look like pure digital magic. But in 1997, CGI couldn't deliver that level of detail alone. The future was built the old-fashioned way, with miniature models. Dozens of skyscrapers were handcrafted in the effects workshop, each one fitted with tiny lights, intricate textures, and layered facades for depth. The production team used motion control cameras to fly through these models, just as George Lucas's crew had done for Star Wars. Only after the physical shots were complete did digital artists step in, adding moving vehicles, atmospheric effects, and glowing billboards. This hybrid approach gave the city a tactile realism that pure CGI of the era couldn't match. The depth was literal, the camera wasn't faking perspective. It was actually moving through a three-dimensional space. Every building was real enough to touch, yet stylized enough to feel like a dream. In a film obsessed with color, texture, and visual chaos, the city became a character in its own right. It wasn't just a backdrop for Corbin Dallas's taxi chase. It was a living, breathing vision of the future, assembled piece by human hands. Fact number 20. a French film that spoke blockbuster. The Fifth Element was a French production through and through, funded by French studios, directed by a French filmmaker, and shaped by a distinctly European vision of science fiction. But Luc Besson knew that if he wanted this strange, expensive film to reach a global audience, it had to speak the language of Hollywood, literally. He cast American leads, hired British crews, and filmed entirely at Pinewood Studios in London. The dialogue was written in English from the start, not as an artistic choice, but as a practical one. The budget was massive, the largest in French cinema history, and recouping it required breaking into the US market. This blend of European style and Hollywood accessibility created something unique. The film looked nothing like its American contemporaries, yet it felt big enough to stand beside them. It was too French for Hollywood, too Hollywood for France, and somehow perfect for everyone else. And then there was Multipass. A throwaway line from Lilu repeated in broken English became a fan-favorite catchphrase. It spread through pop culture like a wink from the film itself, appearing in video games, memes, and sci-fi tributes decades later. In a way, Multipass summed up the whole project, a small piece of French imagination that spoke fluently to the entire world.